All right, let's start the webinar. Welcome everyone to our webinar on textile fiber labeling regulations. I am Avni Kumar Patkur, heading India Sales and Marketing with Cotecna CPS. Agenda for the today's webinar is to discuss and delve into the intricate world of labeling requirements for textiles across US and EU region. Since the textile industry continues to expand globally, understanding and complying with these regulations are of the utmost importance. Now, before we get into the details of the fiber labeling regulations, I would like to share a few details about our organization. Cotecna Group is a Swiss-based company founded in 1974, and as on date, it has expanded its footprints across the globe in more than 50 countries with presence of 140 offices and labs with 5,000 plus employee strength. We are glad to share with you that this year Cotecna is celebrating 50 years of service delivery in TIEC industry. Cotecna CPS has state-of-the-art laboratories in India, Bangladesh, and in Dubai. In India, we have capabilities for soft lines, hard lines, leather and footwear testings, electrical and electronic product testings, toys and analytical testings, along with the inspection and audit services. In Bangladesh, we can cater to the requirement for soft lines, leather and footwear testings, and analytical testings. And in Dubai, we have capabilities to deliver on soft lines, hard lines, leather and footwear, toy testing, and analytical testings. Along with the testing capabilities, we have a very capable team of inspectors in our inspections and audit team with capabilities for inspections of all product categories. And we can offer inspections not only in India, but also in Sri Lanka, China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brazil, and Pakistan as well. Moving on, there shall be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So you may please note down any queries or questions that you have in your mind and ask to our expert panel. Now I would like to introduce our eminent speakers for the day, Mr. Bhimsen Rai, who is our Softline Lab Manager, and Mr. Santosh Kesri, who is the technical lead with us. Over to you, Bhimsen.
I'm taking care of softline technical part in the Cotecna CPS. And over to Bhim for the US regulations.
Thanks, Santosh. So next slide, please. So before we start the US fiber label regulation, we will know why it is important. The correct information that aids in the care, compliance, and selection of clothing, reinforcing brands, identity, and promoting sustainable practices. As we are moving towards the more informed, environmentally conscious society, the role of correct product label is very much important. Next slide, please. So now we will know what are the products are covered and what are the products are not covered. So clothing except hat and shoes, handkerchiefs, scarves, bedding items, curtain, casemates, towel, floor coverings, flags, like upholstery or mattress stuffing that is not reused. That if the stuffing is reused, the label must be indicated. Linings, interlining, filling, or padding used for the structural purpose are not covered. Bagging of carpet and rugs are also not covered with the regulation. Shoes, slippers, and all outer footwear are not covered with the regulation. But if a slipper made of wool is covered under the textile wool regulation, sieving and handicrafts threads are also not covered. Same way, stiffening, trimming, facing, and interfacings are also not covered. Next slide, please. The following are excluded from the textile labeling requirement. Unless you decide to make a statement about the fiber content, these items are excluded from the fiber content labeling. The products are like belts, armbands, garters, labels, book cloth, tapestry cloth, neckties, diaper liners, loop clips intended for the handicraft purpose, artist canvas, and shoelaces are not covered with the regulation. Next slide, please. Here in this slide, we will see how to label a product. If your product is covered by the Textile or Wool Act rules, it must be labeled to show the fiber content. For products covered by the Textile and Act rules, the generic names and percentage by weight of each constituent fiber must be listed in descending order of predominance. Like if a product is having 65% of its weight is rayon and 35% of its weight is polyester, the label will be like 60% polyester rayon and 35% polyester. We will take another example. If a product is having 50% of its weight is cotton, 35% of its weight is polyester, 10% of its weight is viscose, and 5% of it is elastane, the label will be 50% cotton, 35% polyester, 10% viscose, and 5% elastane. So if your product is made of 100% wool, 100%, then the label would be like 100% wool or 100% all or wool. Or we will take another example. If your product is made of the cotton, you can label it as a 100% cotton or all cotton. So there are exemptions for the 5% rule. Like if your product is made of the 94% cotton and 6% polyester, so you have to label that product. You have to label the generic name of the both fibers. But if your product is having less than 5% of the any fiber, it can be labeled as the other fiber or it can be labeled as other fibers. So there are some exemptions in the 5% rule. Like if your product is having wool, any amount of wool, it is less than 5%, it also be listed as a wool. Like your product is having 96% cotton and 4% wool, you cannot label it as other fiber. You have to label it as a wool. In the same manner, if your product is having functional fiber, then it should be labeled as a spandex if it is spandex. Like if your product is having 96% polyester, 4% is spandex, it can be not be labeled as a other fiber. You have to label it as a spandex only. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we will see what are the generic name permitted in USA and EU. In US, these are the listed generic name like acetate, triacetate, acrylic, amide, azulon, elastoester, fluoropolymer, olefin, rayon, spandex, glass, melamine, metallic, monoacrylic, noaloid, nylon, nitrile, polyester, rubber, and vinyl. In USA, as per FTC guideline, you can use EU generic name also, but EU you cannot use the US generic name. So you can use EU generic name USA also. Next slide, please. In this section, we will see about the metallic or metal or metallite fibers. So what is metallic? A manufactured fiber composed of a metal, plastic coated metal coated plastic, or a core completely covered by metal. So what is metal? Metal fiber obtained from the metal only. What is metallite fiber? Fiber coated with metals. Metal shall be used to describe a fiber that has a metal component supported by a textile fiber. Generally, polyester is used for the coating. Metallite fiber can also be used for such fibers. Metal shall be used to describe a fiber that is wholly comprised of metal. Next slide, please. In this slide, we will talk about how to label a pile fabrics. So fiber labeling of pile fabrics can be described in two ways. If you can label the product as a whole, or you can disclose pile and packing separately. So if you decide to disclose the pile and packing separately, you have to give ratio between pack and pile. So option 1, you can label it as a 60% cotton, 40% nylon, or you can report it as an 100% nylon pile and 100% cotton bag. But in this scenario, you have to give a ratio between bag and pile. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we will see how to label a product with coating. So we will take two examples. In first example, we will say a product which is fully coated. And another example, we will talk about a product which is partially coated. So if a product is fully coated, it should be disclosed as 100% polyester or coating nitrile coating. So if a product is partially coated, then you can disclose it as coating 100% nitrile, batch 100% polyester. You can also label textile part only. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we will look at how to label a product with trademark name. Trademark name can be used on content label as long as it appears next to the generic name. So nowadays, you must have seen in many garments, there are cool match poster labels. So in this case, you can label it as a like a product is made of 100% polyester and claim it is cool max. You can label it as a 100% cool max polyester. Okay. So we will talk about the geographical location wise claim also. So like there is a geographical location wise claim also, like it is Egyptian cotton, Chinese silk. So in this case, any lab cannot verify its geographical location. In this case, we can ask for a document of certificate that it is made from Egyptian cotton or Chinese silk. In the similar way, any lab cannot identify rayon from bamboo or viscose from bamboo. So in this case, the manufacturer should present a document of certificate so that lab can give a remark that it is made from the viscose from bamboo or rayon from bamboo. Next slide, please. In this slide, we will see about non-fibrous material. How to label a non-fibrous material. So non-fibrous material is not required include to label in the label. So what are the non-fibrous material? Like zippers, buttons, beads, sequins, leather patches, painted design, or any parts that are not made from the fiber or yarn or fabric. That is called non-fibrous material and it is exempted from the labeling. So next slide, please. In this slide, we will see how to handle the decorative trims. So if any decoration or design which is more than 15% of surface area and made from different fiber from the base material, it needs this sectional disclosure. In another case, if a decoration is less than 15% of surface area and it is not same as the base fiber, the statement should be marked on the label exclusive of decoration. We will see how to include ornamentation, when to include any ornamentation, when less than 5% of the product fiber weight and made of different fiber from base fabric, disclose the other fibers in the product without regard to the ornamentation and include the statement exclusive of ornamentation. Next slide, please. In this slide, we will talk about the trimming. How to report a trimming. So fiber content disclosure not required for trims. Trims like collar, cups, braiding, waist or wristbands, rick-rack tape, belting, binding, labels, leg bands, gussets, doors, welts, findings and superimposed hosiery garters. If a garment is having elastic material in a minor proportion and it is used for the structural purpose, then it can be excluded. Elastic material that is part of the base fabric from which a product is made, if the elastic is less than 20% of the surface area, in this case, the required fiber content information should be followed by the statement exclusive of elastic. Next slide, please. In this slide, we will see how to include lining in label. Fiber disclosure is not required for linings, interlining, filling, or paddings. That is used for the structural purpose. If a lining is used for the one purpose or contain any amount of wool, the fiber must be disclosed as a sectional disclosure. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we will see what are the tolerance given by the FTC. The tolerance for blends is plus minus 3%. 3% mean in actual amount, not in percentage. Example, if the label indicates that product contains 40% cotton, the actual amount of cotton may vary from the 30% to 43% of the total fiber weight. If a product is made from one fiber, the word all or 100% must be used. So there is no tolerance given by the FTC for the single fibers. Now, my US fiber labeling is over here. Now I would like to hand over it to my colleague Mr. Santosh for EU fiber labeling.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share some overview about EU fiber labeling part. In the Europe textile industry, there is a huge market, both domestic and global production. Combinedly, the inter-regional textile trade is strong and making the market for importers that much fiercer and competitive. Adding to these challenges for textile importers, EU has designed some regulations and standards for chemical as well as fiber content labeling part. So here we will look after some key points about the EU regulations for fiber labeling. These regulations that is meant to protect consumer interest and reduce the risk of fraudulent composition claims. Next slide, please. So in the EU, how to label the products? Basically, whatever goods we are sending to EU, that must carry a label indicating the fiber content, either on the packaging or in the permanent labeled form. Label can be removable also. The most important rule is that the fiber content must be easily visible to consumer at the point of sale. In the EU as well, there is a tolerance of 3%. Again, that is on the actual amount. Suppose there is 40% cotton, so it may vary from 37 to 43%, which is permitted from the claimed content and the actual analysis done by the laboratories. Next slide, please. So how should be our product labeled? So here we will discuss about two scenarios. Suppose a textile product consists of two or more fibers, where one fiber accounts not less than 85% of the finished product. In that scenario, label should be marked in the following way. Either by the name of the main fiber, immediately preceded or followed by its percentage of weight of the product, or by the name of main fiber, immediately preceded or followed by 85% minimum. Or we can say the name of fiber in the descending order of their proportion by weight, immediately preceded or followed by their percentage of the weight of the product. Or if there is a case of fiber mixture where no fiber accounts 85% or more of the total weight, in that way, following indications shall be used. The name of each fiber in descending order, with or without percentage, or we can give it as fiber individually accounting for less than 10%, In that case, we can report accumulated value. Suppose there are 3 fibers which is less than 10%. In that case, we need to report accumulated values as other fibers. Like suppose there is 9% acrylic, 5% nylon, 4% viscose. In that case, we need to give accumulated value as other fibers. Next slide, please. So here we will see the expressions of 100% pure and all. The above expression shall apply only for the articles composed of one fiber. Exceptions are as below. The presence of other fiber due to inadvertent impurities, which arises during manufacturing process and which weight is less than 2% of the total weight, that can be omitted. Or fibers and fabrics which are intended purely to produce a decorative effect, which is visible and distinct, and which is less than 7% of the total weight, that can be omitted. Or fibers which are incorporated into the product to obtain an anti-static effect, but less than 2% of the total weight, that can be also omitted. Next slide, please. Here we will discuss about two cases, like if a textile product consists of 2 or more components with the different fiber contents. Like we can see a dress where dress part having in the bodies there is a different material, and in the skirt part there is a different material. So in this case, we need to give sectional disclosure for both parts. In the second scenario, where there are 2 or more garments which are combining making the single unit, in that case, we can use a single fiber label, like a 2-piece suit set. Next slide, please. There are some other exceptions in textile, like some products, braziers, corsets, corselets, or corsetry. In the braziers, in these cases, we can give overall content or by the sectional disclosures. Like in the brazier, we can give outside, inside fabrics, cuffs and backs separately. Or in the same way, corset and corselet. In this way, in these also we can give the sectional fiber disclosures. Next slide, please. In continuation, there are other exceptions in the textile. Suppose there is a overall embroidered fabric. In that case, we should report base fabric along with embroidery yarn, including the embroidery backing threads, which can be declared separately. But suppose embroidery portion is less than 10% of the total surface area. In that case, embroidery threads need not to be declared. Another example is carpets. Suppose a carpet is having the backing, which is of the different material. But in that case, we need to disclose only the used surface of the carpet for the fiber disclosure. For velvet and plus fabrics, separate declaration of the base fabric and the piles are required unless these two materials are made of different fibers. Next slide, please. In the same way, there are some exceptions in the lining. Like for jackets and curtains, if there is any male lining, that must be disclosed on the fiber label. Or lining used in the gloves, footwears, which is purely used for the warmth purpose, it also must be declared on the label. There are some linings materials in the undergarments, nightwears, dressing gowns, hats, trousers, coat sleeves, ties. These are exempted from this. But in the Europe, there are jackets which are having leather lining or leather fur lining, that also not required to disclose. But in the common practice, there are gusset linings in the brief which must be disclosed. Next slide, please. Here we will consider some points while we are calculating overall content for the fiber labeling. Suppose there is inadvertent impurities which is less than 2%, that can be omitted while we are labeling for the product. Fibers are parts which is used to produce a decorative effect, and it is less than 7%, but not integral part of the garment, that can be omitted. Fibers used to provide an anti-static effect, but it is again less than 2%, which is not required to disclose. In the same way, there are labels, badges, edging, trimming, which is not integral part of the product or garment, that also not required to disclose. Elastic threads, bands, which are used as the specific points like top of the socks or in the waistband bottoms, that also not required to disclose. Stiffening, interlining, reinforcement material, extra yarns used in the toe and heels of the socks, swing threads, wadding, these are not required to be disclosed. Next slide, please. As per EU directive, there are some products are listed which doesn't require any labeling. Like we can see purses, cases, or travel goods of textile, textile watch straps, textile tea cozies, shoe cleaning cases, table mats. These materials doesn't require any labels as per EU. Next slide, please. In the continuation, there are some other products as well, like makeup cases, spectacle cases, artificial fabric flowers, toilet cases, stuffed pen holders, oven gloves, ties, and felt hats. These also doesn't require any labeling as per EU directive. Next slide, please. So as we have seen, fiber content as well as it is a legislative mandatory requirement for US, EU, and other international markets, which must be certified as fit for sale in US and EU market as well as other international market. To meet the same, fiber content identification must be carried out through any third-party laboratories, which is very essential for certification. And also it will help out for correct labeling so that the goods will be allowed in the international market to sell out. Thank you. Now it's over to Avni for the Q&A sessions, if any. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Kesri and Mr. Bhimsen, for the insightful details pertaining to fiber labeling regulations and requirements across both the markets. Now it's time for the Q&A. We have received few queries and questions through the registration process. So first question is knowledge about wash care, price tag, brand labels, size labels, and blister stickers, etc. Mr. Bhimsen, can you please enlighten us on these details?
Thanks, Avni. I just want to answer for the question. Actually, this question does not belong to this session, but will definitely include this question in our next section. Okay, so we will definitely cover these all things in our next event.
All right. Okay. Moving on to the next question is, I have an order with a piece of decorative feather attached at the end of the belt. Do we need to disclose the composition of the feather in the fiber label? Santosh, can you please enlighten on this? Yes.
Yeah. So thanks for the questions. It's a good question actually, no? So as the feather is, if the feather is from the any animal, so as per EU directive, if the textile part in the belt is 80% or more by the weight, so it will fall under the EU regulation. However, inclusive labeling is sufficient for this type of product. Means we need to mention that contains non-textile parts of animal origin along with the 80% portion of the belt.
Okay. Next slide, please. The next question is, if a skirt manufactured for Europe, which has three components, shell with 97% of cotton, 3% of elastane, overlay with feather attached on the outer surface of shell, and lining 100% polyester. We need your suggestion about the way to disclose feather in fiber labeling, how to make the label. Mr. Santosh, please share the details on this.
Yeah, sure, Omni. Actually, here also we can see feather attached on the garment. So we recommend you to disclose textile parts first, and along with the added remark that contain non-textile part of animal origin, if the feather used in the garment is real feather. So in that way, we will use the labeling as cell 97% cotton, 3% elastane, lining 100% polyester, along with the remark like contains non-textile parts of animal origin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Right, so we have two more questions. If a collar contains any wool, is it exempted from fiber labeling according to threading your way through the labeling requirements under the Textile and Wool Act? Mr. Rai, can you please share few details on this?
Yeah, sure, Omni. If question is if a collar contains any wool. So as in last previous slide, I have already explained that if any amount of wool present in any trims, it must be labeled. If a product is falls under the category of textile wool and regulation act, then it must be disclosed.
Okay, shall we move on to the next question?
Sure.
If a yarn is composed of spun yarn, which is 100% rayon and metallic yarn, should it be labeled as 70% rayon, 30% metallic based on quantitative analysis, or can the spun yarn and metallic yarn be combined and called out as metallic?
It should be labeled as 70% rayon or 30% metallic, or whatever qualitative analysis we are getting, it can be labeled as.
All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Rai. Next slide, please. Right. Are there any more questions from the audience? We are open for any queries you have. You can type your questions and queries in the chat box. Okay, it seems there are no questions or no queries. Anyways, if one of you would like to have any more information on any of the sections, you can reach out to us on the given address and mail IDs, and we'll be sending you a thank you mail with the recording of the webinar along with a subscription link for the upcoming events and newsletters. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Bhimsen Rai and Mr. Santosh Kesari for this wonderful webinar.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.